The American dream. Work hard, climb the ladder, achieve upward mobility. It's fundamental to how we think about this country.
It really is.
But what if that dream is, well, increasingly out of reach for a huge number of people?
Yeah.
What if the system itself, the way our economy is structured and maybe specific policies, create these deep divisions,
Right.
kind of locking millions into what our sources are calling a low-wage sector?
Exactly. And it's not just about, individual choices or effort.
No, it feels much bigger,
Yeah.
systemic. It shapes so many lives.
And that's precisely what we're going to dive into today. We're looking at the origins, the evolution, and the, frankly, vast impact of this low-wage sector in America.
Okay.
It's a story that's really woven from big economic shifts, deliberate political decisions, and these social dynamics that just persist.
So our mission today is to try and unpack this really complex history. We're drawing on historical records, economic analyses, social studies,
Yeah.
trying to understand how we ended up with this, well, almost a two-tiered economy,
Yeah. How it started, how it's sustained.
and what it really means for millions of people living it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's trace this back. If we're looking for the start, the foundational cracks that allowed this low-wage sector to really emerge, when did it begin to take shape?
Well, a lot of the research we looked at points pretty strongly to 1971. That year seems to be a critical turning point.
1971. Why then?
This is where President Nixon's political strategy plays a really pivotal and, you have to say, racially charged role.
Oh, okay.
I mean, he'd already won the '68 election, partly with his Southern strategy, right? Which basically leveraged regional racial tensions, the whole history of segregation.
Right, appealing to white Southerners.
Exactly. Our sources use this pretty stark phrase describing them as heirs of slave owners, people who were angered by the civil rights movement, wanting to preserve their political power, keep African Americans in a subordinate position.
So it's a clear political calculation tapping into those existing anxieties.
Mm-hmm.
What happened in '71 specifically?
Well, Nixon makes this significant move. He effectively replaces President Johnson's war on poverty
Okay.
with a new war on drugs.
Uh-huh.
And right around the same time, he appoints Lewis Powell to the Supreme Court. Now, Powell's presented as a moderate,
Yeah, I remember that narrative.
but he was actually really integral to Nixon's Southern strategy. There's even a report Nixon told Powell his responsibility was to the South, to the Supreme Court, and to the country in that specific order.
Wow, that order says a lot.
It does.
So this is where it gets really, really impactful. How did this new war on drugs connect directly to that racial and economic strategy, creating what some people have called, controversially maybe, but powerfully, a new Jim Crow?
Well, as the war on drugs ramped up, the enforcement, it was just far, far stronger against African Americans than against whites.
What?
It quickly became, in Michelle Alexander's widely used term, the new Jim Crow. Our sources explain it as sort of retooling the racist intent of the old Jim Crow laws from after Reconstruction. And then Powell's votes on the Supreme Court helped expand Nixon's Southern strategy into national policies. This was partly, a response to the Great Migration, all those African Americans who had moved north in the decades before.
So we're talking about a really fundamental shift here, not just a policy tweak.
No, not at all. It's foundational, deeply rooted in racial tensions, and it really sets the stage for the kind of two-tiered economy we see today.
Okay, so that's the origin story in a way. What did this actually mean for the American worker? How do we start to define these different economic tiers that emerged?
You start to see this clear split, this dual economy. It's distinct from what economists call the FTE full-time equivalent sector, the higher paid workers.
Right.
So at the bottom, you have your low-wage workers. These are primarily laborers, service workers. Then you had a group of middle-wage workers, clerks, operators, assemblers. But, and this is crucial, those kinds of jobs are rapidly disappearing.
Yeah, that's a story we hear a lot.
And then at the top, you've got the highly paid workers, professionals, managers, often needing a college degree.
And the sources we looked at, they paint a pretty grim picture for people in that low-wage sector.
They do.
They say these jobs barely allow workers to maintain the lifestyle they grew up expecting.
Right, and saving for retirement. It seems farther away than many current needs. The income just isn't there for long-term planning.
This distinction, it feels absolutely critical for understanding why the middle class is shrinking, how job opportunities are changing across the U.S.
Definitely.
Now, it's tempting, isn't it, to just point the finger at technology, automation taking jobs. But our research suggests it's much more complex than that.
Oh, absolutely. Technology is only part of the picture.
So what are the other key drivers domestic, international. What carved out and sort of solidified this low-wage sector?
Well, our sources show several interconnected causes, and interestingly, many of them actually resulted from decisions made within that higher wage FTE sector.
Well, like what?
Well, take technology. Initially, government spending, especially military spending, spurred huge advances in tech electronics.
Which sounds good, right? Innovation.
On the surface, yes. But then, computer capital started to substitute for human labor in routine tasks. The jobs that follow explicit rules.
Factory jobs, basically.
Exactly. The kind of jobs that built the unions in the 20th century, the ones that drew workers north during the Great Migration.
Right.
But that migration ended right around the economic confusion of the 1970s, leaving these new urban residents scrambling for good jobs, just as the very nature of work was changing under their feet.
In computers, they weren't so good at the non-routine stuff.
Right. The problem solving, complex thinking, individual attention. Computers struggled with that, so the labor market really split.
Diverged.
Yeah, exactly. Those non-routine jobs went in two directions. Well-paying professional jobs in the FTE sector.
Right.
And poorly paid service jobs, which became the backbone of the low-wage sector.
And you can see this playing out even now.
Absolutely. The sources give an example. Drivers now find their way with the aid of Uber maps on their smartphones. Driverless cars can use the same maps once they learn how to drive in traffic. The vulnerability is clear.
So technology changed the kind of jobs. But finance, the whole world of corporate finance, that also played a huge role in reshaping companies and employment, didn't it?
A massive role. Think back to the early 20th century. Many service jobs, cleaners, gardeners, drivers, they were done inside big companies.
Right. They were employees of the main company.
Which often meant more equitable pay, better benefits, pensions sometimes. But then as finance really expanded in the late 70s, companies felt this pressure to specialize, focus on core activities to boost their stock price.
Oh, shareholder value.
Exactly. So they started outsourcing, hiring outside firms for what they call menial jobs.
And the same computers that were getting rid of factory jobs made it easier to manage these outsourced services.
Precisely. Easier to create instructions, monitor the work remotely. You didn't need company supervisors. You just had contracts with separate service companies.
Is there a specific example of that?
Yeah, the hotel industry is a stark one. Our sources say today, over 80% of a hotel's employees are hired and supervised by a separate management company.
80%. Wow.
And this whole shift in business organizations, subcontracting, franchising, these complex supply chains, it fundamentally changed the game. It moved from paying wages within a company structure to hiring based on contract prices.
Which erodes things like equity, job security.
Totally. Equity considerations, job tenure, pensions, they all got weaker. It created this relentless competitive pressure on workers, and it severed that sense of identification with the main firm.
Leading to lower morale.
Yeah, low morale, even antagonism instead of cooperation, the sources suggest. You see it with independent contractors, too, like the Uber example we mentioned. Uber settled that lawsuit, paid drivers a bit more, but crucially kept them classified as independent contractors.
Okay, so we have technology changing jobs, finance changing how companies operate. What about competition? Or maybe the lack of it.
That's another key piece. What's fascinating here is how a reduction in competition among big American companies hits the average worker.
How so?
It's widespread, tech giants, agriculture, wireless carriers, fewer big players competing. And this has two main effects. First, less competition lets companies raise prices, get monopoly rents, basically.
Which eats into wages, effectively.
Exactly. It reduces the value of poor people's wages. Second, less competition for workers between companies directly holds down wages. Fewer firms fighting over talent means they don't have to bid wages up. Plus, some sources suggest these growing monopolies might even be less innovative.
And this connects somehow to mutual funds. That seems like a leap.
It does, but think about it. Large mutual funds often own shares in several big companies within the same industry, right?
Yeah.
Well, our sources argue this reduces competition between firms. Why? Because these firms, partly owned by the same big investors, are less likely to poach employees from each other. They don't rock the boat.
Okay, I see the connection.
They also present a united face when dealing with labor suppliers, preventing competition among themselves from driving wages up. So workers get squeezed from both sides. Low wages and high prices. It's a double whammy.
Okay, so domestic factors are huge. But it wasn't just happening in a vacuum. Global forces played a massive role too, right? changing the labor market fundamentally.
Oh, absolutely. You can't understand this without looking globally. For instance, immigration. We've seen a steady stream of migrants from Latin America over recent decades.
And the sources connect this to U.S. foreign policy.
They do. They argue it was often stimulated by American political and military intervention in Central America.
Right.
Actions that deposed leaders seen as unfriendly to American businesses created turmoil, weakened national economies.
Making immigration north seem like the best option.
An appealing alternative to limited options at home, as the sources put it.
And at the same time, we had this huge inflow of foreign goods.
Yes, particularly the massive inflow of Japanese and then Chinese products, this hammered demand for American manufacturing. Manufacturing jobs dropped sharply, particularly fast after 2000, when the United States eliminated future tariff rises for Chinese goods. Although, interestingly, the sources note this huge adjustment had very little impact on real earnings overall. Then there's capital mobility. The old rules, the Bretton Woods capital controls, were dismantled.
Making it easier for companies to move production overseas.
Much easier. And American firms used this offshore capability as leverage in bargaining with their workers, essentially saying, accept lower wages or we move the jobs.
Which must have caused huge labor unrest.
It did. And often, government policy sided with employers through deregulation. Union membership and power declined sharply.
So pulling all these threads together.
You end up with a situation where technology, changing business structures, imports, immigration, the threat of offshoring, they all combine to keep American wages down, especially in that low-wage sector. These workers are effectively competing in a global labor market made easier by cheaper transport and lower tariffs.
So let's connect this back to people's lives. Beyond the big economic shifts, the policy decisions. What did all this mean for daily life, for well-being, for people's futures in that low-wage sector?
The human cost is immense. You see it in the numbers first. Real wages have basically been flat since 1970. Constancy of real wages, the sources call it.
So even as the national economy grew.
Labor's share of that income fell. That's a huge shift from before 1970, when economists widely assumed labor's share was constant.
And even more sobering, mortality rates.
Yes. Crucially, mortality among people in the low-wage sector actually increased relative to those in the higher-paid FTE sector.
Which really challenges that idea of just telling everyone to retire later.
Exactly. It raises this important question. If society-wide life expectancy is rising, why are calls for later retirement maybe misguided for a lot of people? Because members of the FTE sector live longer, but people who need Social Security or other forms of retirement income are not living longer.
That disparity is stark. And this reality, it also seems to poke holes in that classic economic theory about international trade being good for everyone.
It really does. The theory says, sure, there are winners and losers, but the winners gain enough to compensate the losers, so everyone could be better off.
Could be.
But the key word is compensate. Our sources stress that compensation needs to be paid in order for the losers, in this case, low-wage workers, to be happy with increased trade.
And that compensation largely didn't happen.
Right. The failure of public policy to actually implement that part of the theory really undermines public support for globalization.
Can you give an example of how these pressures played out for workers?
Yeah, look at the GM bailout in 2009. As part of the deal with the United Auto Workers Union, they expanded a two-tier wage system.
Meaning new hires got paid less.
Way less. Wages for new hires were cut to about half of the $29 an hour longtime union members got. They raised it later, $17 an hour in 2011, but still.
Huge difference.
And defined benefit pensions, gone for new hires, replaced with 401k plans. The goal was explicit. Bring GM's labor costs in line with non-union plants like Honda and Toyota.
But how is someone earning $17 an hour, maybe $35,000 a year, supposed to save meaningfully for retirement in a 401k?
It's incredibly difficult. A recent report found 40% of non-retirees have given little or no thought to financial planning for retirement. The money just isn't there after basic expenses.
And this brings us back to the Great Migration, but this story takes a pretty heartbreaking turn here, doesn't it? What happened to that promise of opportunity in the northern cities?
It largely evaporated for many. The decline of manufacturing just led directly to urban joblessness on a massive scale.
Right.
And the Great Migration, which mostly ended by 1970, it certainly didn't lead to integrated housing up north.
No, white flight was already happening.
Exactly. It started as soon as Southern black workers began appearing in northern cities. One source said it was responsible for 1/2 of the increase in segregation in the 1930s.
Wow, that early.
Yeah. And after World War II, prosperous white residents kept leaving for the suburbs. They wanted to avoid integrated schools. Plus, they were encouraged by generous GI Bill mortgages and new highways, making commuting easier.
While cities were left behind.
Pretty much. At the same time, you had pervasive redlining, denying loans in urban areas, so there was no comparable mortgage stimulus for cities. Funding for aging urban transit systems declined too.
Making it harder to own a home, harder to get a job.
Much harder. And you saw this phenomenon called neighborhood tipping. Once a neighborhood reached a certain threshold of minority residents, maybe 5 to 20%, it would rapidly shift to being almost entirely minority.
So white urban workers left.
And were often replaced by black migrants, which unfortunately just aggravated the competition for the fewer good jobs remaining. Wages for less skilled workers fell, urban unemployment grew.
I remember William J. Wilson writing about this.
Yes, he observed, concentrated poverty is positively associated with joblessness. And critically, because the public image, the public face of the low-wage sector is black, this merging of class and race fed directly back into those political decisions, expanding Nixon's Southern strategy into a national one.
It's a vicious cycle.
It really is. Andrew Sherlin describes life in the low-wage urban sector using the term casualization.
Casualization, what does that mean?
It means work becomes casual, short-term, not contractual, and unregulated, fleeting, unstable.
And that instability spills over into other parts of life.
Yes. Family life often becomes similarly casual. Lower marriage rates, a sense of rootlessness among less educated young adults. It stands in sharp contrast, the sources say, to the greater stability of the lives of the highly educated in the FTE sector.
So against this backdrop of economic shifts, social transformations, how did government policies keep evolving? And what were the real-world consequences, often pretty devastating for people stuck in that low-wage sector?
Well, President Reagan, according to our sources, fundamentally reversed 50 years of American domestic policy.
Oh, so?
By cutting federal grants to state and local governments, the grants that often help support poor people, public service jobs, job training programs, they were cut back sharply.
You can see the impact in city budgets.
Dramatically. The share of federal funding for large cities fell from 22% to 6% of their budgets. That's a massive drop.
So jobs disappearing from the private sector due to deindustrialization and jobs disappearing from the public sector due to funding cuts.
Exactly. A huge reduction in opportunities for both white and black urban residents. And this built on Nixon's earlier new federalism, which turned federal programs into block grants for state,
Giving states more control.
which sounded good, but Reagan then revealed the underlying aim by slashing and even eliminating many of those block grants.
And the Flint water crisis in 2015.
Yeah.
That feels like a direct, tragic consequence of this kind of policy environment.
It's a horrifying example. Flint, former auto town, hit hard by job losses, deep financial trouble.
Right.
Governor Snyder backed a law letting him appoint emergency managers to run cities like Flint. Flint went into receivership in 2012, and in April 2014, one of these managers decided to switch Flint's water from the Detroit system to the local Flint River to save money.
And the problem started immediately. Brown water, complaints.
Right away. But even worse, in January 2015, Detroit offered to reconnect Flint and waive the big connection fee, but a different emergency manager refused the offer.
Refuse free, clean water.
Refused it. Then, high lead levels were found in the water in February and March 2015. This was known within the governor's office, but still, no action.
Unbelievable.
It was only after doctors went public in September 2015 showing elevated lead in kids' blood that the state finally started to move. Flint got reconnected in October.
But the damage is done. Lead in people's bodies, damaged pipes.
Absolutely. And state and federal emergency funds got blocked by political fights. But the core issue, as our sources stated, is that the governor and the managers, all from the FTE sector, did not consider the health of the black low-wage residents of Flint in making decisions about public services.
They prioritized cost-cutting over health.
They prioritized limiting taxes. It reflects that economic model, the Lewis model, where the higher wage sector might actually benefit from keeping low-wage incomes down, even if it means degrading public services for them.
It's just a devastating example of systemic neglect. And against this backdrop of hardship, frustration, the sources mention drug use increasing.
Yes, frustration from unemployment, all these troubles came out in the use of cocaine.
which then fueled the war on drugs.
Exactly. And critically, federal penalties were structured to be much heavier for crack cocaine, which was more prevalent among low-wage African Americans than for powder cocaine, favored more by the FTE sector.
Leading to huge sentencing disparities.
Massive disparities, lots of black users got heavy sentences. This just poured fuel on Nixon's war on drugs, led to punitive state laws like the infamous Three Strikes Law spreading in the 90s.
And the prison population just exploded.
It mushroomed from under 500,000 inmates to over 2 million today, and drug convictions account for more than half of that increase.
So federal money that maybe once went to urban jobs?
Now often finances rural prisons. It's a huge shift. Today, there are 7 million people under correctional supervision in the U.S.
7 million. And the racial disparity in prisons is stark.
It is. Blacks are less than 15% of the population. They are 40% of the prison population. There's a shocking estimate based on data suggesting 1 in 3 black males will go to prison during his lifetime.
1 in 3. That means, as the sources say, every black family knows someone who is in jail or has been in jail.
Yeah?
So this raises a crucial question. How does this massive system of incarceration actually perpetuate the cycle of disadvantage for people in the low-wage sector?
Well, once someone is released, they face huge barriers. In most states, they're denied access to social programs. Finding work is incredibly difficult with a record.
Leading to high rates of recidivism.
Exactly. And think about the impact on families, communities. Young men growing up in the shadow of the incarcerated men of their families find it hard to plan for the future, to gain skills, maybe even to think of the future or education at all.
So the war on drugs, directed mainly at urban black males, actively makes it harder to escape the low-wage sector.
It does. Past convictions block access to government help for jobs, training, even food assistance. The constant threat of prison sends a message that personal effort probably will not be rewarded. It makes mass incarceration look like, well, a form of social control.
And the evidence supports that interpretation.
Well, incarceration rates kept rising through the 90s, even as the actual crime rate was falling. A recent survey concluded there is little evidence to believe that the higher incarceration rates have caused the reduction in crime in the last 2 decades.
So it wasn't primarily about stopping crime?
The data suggests maybe not primarily. And while the repression falls most heavily on black communities, it absolutely affects whites and Latinos in the low-wage sector, too. The majority of inmates are actually white.
But they are less visible in the public discussion.
Right. Poor whites are often less visible than blacks in public discussions of programs. Think about Reagan's welfare queens trope that was widely seen as a clear racial reference.
And even though outright racial language might be less common now.
The sources argue that the persistence of race prejudice is still visible. They mention the birther movement against President Obama, the kind of hateful responses he got online.
And attempts to fix things like ban the box campaigns.
They often reveal the underlying issues. A test of Ban the Box in New York found it did not help black ex-felons get a job. Why? Because employers denied specific information about criminal records, apparently just relied on general information that blacks were more likely to be ex-felons and refused to hire them.
Wow, so removing the question actually backfired because of broader biases.
It seems so in that case. It's incredibly complex.
And it wasn't just the criminal justice system. The welfare system itself became entangled with this, almost criminalized.
Yes, that's a key point in the research. The public desire to deter and punish welfare cheating has overwhelmed the will to provide economic security. Welfare started carrying this stigma of criminality.
How so?
It's increasingly used as a tool to catch people with outstanding warrants. Drug felons are often barred not just from voting, but from welfare too, pushing them further to the margins.
And the payments themselves eroded.
Exactly. They no longer provide enough funds to live on, so recipients are often forced to rely on other income, often hidden off-the-books work.
Which then gets labeled as fraud.
Even though the system itself almost encourages it, this concealment is deemed a fraud. It creates these perverse incentives that maintain poor members of the low-wage sector in a marginal existence.
There was that example from Vermont.
Yeah, really striking. A small town, just a couple of police officers. When drugs were found, they indicted white suspects only 12% of the time, but black suspects 87% of the time. 7 times as often.
Okay, so while racial dynamics are clearly central to this story, it's important we also acknowledge the broader impact. What about white communities in the low-wage sector? They face huge challenges too, right?
Absolutely. And what's fascinating, or perhaps tragic, is how similar the pressures became for poor whites, even if they were often less visible in the public conversation.
Because white flight wasn't just about race.
No, it was about class, too. It stranded many poor whites in those same declining inner cities. They ended up facing economic and social pressures similar to those of poor blacks.
And numerically, there are more white people in the low-wage sector overall.
Yes, many more whites than blacks and Latinos in the low-wage sector. And after 1970, the inability to earn enough to support a family, that increased among whites in poor urban areas, too.
So you saw similar social trends. Lower marriage rates, more single-parent households.
Exactly. Urban white marriage rates dropped, single-family households rose, imprisonment rates for poor urban whites went up alongside those for blacks. The decay of social capital, that sense of trust, it was as severe as among blacks, according to the sources.
So the dual economy isn't solely about race.
No. The sources state quite clearly, the American dual economy would exist if there were no American blacks, but the political discussion would be different.
So connecting this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
we're seeing shared systemic problems, but they play out with unique pressures on different communities.
Precisely. William J. Wilson argued that the problems in struggling black neighborhoods stemmed from economic circumstances, not culture. He called them institutional factors.
And that applies more broadly.
His conclusion can be generalized to both white and black members of the low-wage sector. These are characteristics of people trapped by economics with little way out. But the experience isn't identical. For the black community, the sources note, continued pressure from the police represents a constant threat to the acquisition of social capital. That persistent surveillance and interaction with law enforcement has specific effects.
And for the white community in similar circumstances.
For them, the sense of being forgotten has resulted in self-destructive behavior. This actually increased mortality from alcohol and drugs. The deaths of despair we hear about enough to cause overall mortality for poorly educated white men to rise, even while it was falling for other groups.
That's a staggering statistic.
It is. And while the sources suggest the recent political arousal of these men might be healthy in some sense for them, giving voice to frustration, the nature of that appeal, often based on their superiority over similar black men, is seen as deeply troubling for the future.
So we've really taken a deep dive today. We've looked at these complex, often hidden forces that didn't just create, but continue to sustain this low-wage sector in America. From specific policy choices decades ago, deep-seated racial tensions, to these huge economic and technological shifts.
Yeah.
It's clear it's a structural issue. It's not just about individuals making choices.
No, it really isn't. And it raises, I think, a really important question for all of us. What does it actually mean for a society when its own policies, whether intentionally or not, end up creating and perpetuating a system
Right.
where a huge chunk of the population isn't just economically disadvantaged, but is also increasingly marginalized, criminalized, and just left behind?
That's a powerful question to end on. We really encourage you, the listener, to think about how these deep historical threads, these systemic issues, continue to shape the opportunities, the challenges right there in your own community.
Yeah.
And maybe understanding them is the first step towards questioning them, or perhaps even finding ways to change them.